I'm Dean Deal.
And I'm Steve Hoskins.
And you're listening to This Is the Good Life, a podcast devoted to deciphering what it means to live as a Christian in this day and age.
And not just a Christian, but as philosophers, theologians, and maybe even decent golfers.
And a marketing guy.
Yeah, used to be a marketing guy.
Yeah, so speak for yourself. As two longtime college professors, we share a common goal to bring virtue and character back into the conversation of what it means to be Christian.
We'll do this by unpacking the thoughts of both our current culture and prominent philosophers like Aristotle, Kant, Descartes, and a guy called Jesus Christ.
You'll find that some pretty old thinkers had some pretty good ideas.
So join us for a conversation worth having about a life worth living. After
all, this is the good life. Well, hey, Steve.
Hey, Dean.
We're going to talk about rest.
Rest?
Rest.
Rest.
And not sleep. Let's just be real up from the front.
Yeah.
Rest is not sleep.
Well, rest is an activity. It's also a practice. But in order for it to be a practice, it has to be constitutive of a larger reality.
You just made rest sound like a lot of hard work.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is when you start thinking about rest as something other than just simply not being active or not doing things, one of two things happens. Either you get bored or you're boring, or rest becomes a lot of hard work. Entering into the rest of God, Book of Hebrews, it's really hard for us to envision doing that or being a part of that without a lot of hard work.
Well, in my view, you have to go back to what rest looked like before we didn't have rest, which is in Eden.
Yeah.
And in Eden, there was rest.
Yeah, or back to Sunday afternoons with Nazarenes in our childhood.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, well, yeah. But isn't this what's fun about this? Is that there is this component in all of these discussions. We talked about it a whole lot in the season 3 when we talked about the list of virtues.
Yes.
But there's this wonderful, fulfillment of the Aristotelian idea of being an educated person. And an educated person is a person who knows how to compare well and to give an answer. And so when you start talking about, well, we have to put it back into the context of Eden, there are some people who would want to put it into the context of heaven. I mean, this is one of these great discussions.
Back or forward,
this is one of these great discussions. And so I'd really, I'm drawn to that picture that we open the podcast with the picture of this is the good life I would choose no other,
yes.
where the Scottish sheep farmer,
yes.
Hauerwas tells the story,
yes.
and the Scottish sheep farmer's out and he's laying on his back looking up at the sky, and he's tending to the sheep and the sheep are tending to him, and his life's dreams, his life's fulfillments are right there with him. He is in the arena is in him. And so when we start placing virtues like rest into context, I think that's really healthy.
Right.
Because I think that it ought, these kinds of let's call them arguments. That's what I like to call them. Not quarrels.
Of course.
Because everyone else is so nice.
Conversations. Because I'm always trying to sell something.
Because your inner millennial just won't quit coming out to play. But when we start doing that, my mind races.
Yeah.
And starts going,
And it races to both directions. It races to Eden and heaven. And my argument for Eden would be, cursed is the land and of toil.
Yeah.
Toil enters the world. And so it's not so much that I want to recapture the rest of Eden as it is, that's where rest ends. The struggle for survival begins. And ultimately, for me, rest, as described in Hebrew, is to lay down the burden, to lay down the toil, to lay down the struggle for surviving, to enter into God's rest. Are you feeling tired? Take my yoke upon you.
Yeah. For my burden is easy and my yoke is light.
Yes.
But
or my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
But I wasn't a Bible quizzer, so what do I care?
I was doing real good not to do King James. Yeah,
it's the second sentence which always gets you in trouble.
Exactly.
Trying to get there. But I do think there is something in that. It's the ways in which we imagine and idealize the concept of rest that almost it means that when we talk about this, we have to realize that virtues are going to be active in a certain way.
Right.
They're going to be they're going to have force. They're going to have moral force in a certain way. If you think of rest as a concept that is a practice within the structure of Eden, you think about it in a certain way.
Yes.
If you think about rest as a practice within the structure of heaven, you think about if you added a third concept, let's just say paradise, then things really get interesting. But for me, the most interesting way to think about rest is to think about it within the social structure that is the church, worship.
Yes.
And when we head down that pathway, all of a sudden Sabbath rest becomes a completely different mind. It gives me a completely different way of thinking. I grew up in a world, in a Nazarene world, where we called it legalism. Our parents just called it shut up and quit arguing.
We called it Nazarene.
You called it Nazarene, yes. It's all the same thing.
What's the Nazarene? What's it mean? You're a Nazarene. What does that mean?
It means we don't take the Sunday paper.
Let me tell you this list of things we don't do.
We couldn't go swimming on Sunday. We couldn't play football on Sunday. We couldn't eat out on Sunday. First time I ever ate out on a Sunday, I was 16 years old. And well, it was one of those things. I did happen to go out on a preaching venture just to accompany the preacher with my friend Dwayne Gunner, who the preacher was his mother, Nina Gunter, who is, of course, was the first woman general superintendent of the Church of the Nazarene. And we're on the way home, and the sun has gone down. So, after the preaching, and she says, "Are you boys hungry?" Well, I'm 15. Dwayne's 13. Yeah, we're hungry. Well, there's a little steakhouse over here on the side of the road. And so I get home, and my uncle says, "How did it go?" And I said, "Oh, Nina was great. The service was wonderful. And boy, did I enjoy that steak we ate on the way." And he said, "You ate out on a Sunday?" And I said, "Yeah, but Nina paid." And he said, "Well, then it's okay."
Okay.
Yeah, it was fine. If it had been me.
It was her sin. You were just
that's
along.
right.
What were you going to do?
Yeah, and Nina, who didn't put up with any junk, I'm sure never heard a word about it. But in that world, in that social structure of the church and its worship, the idea of rest meant potlucks. It meant not just showing up for Sunday school. It meant enjoying the time that wasn't work. It was something else. It was activity, but God was in it with you. And so we would learn, and the learning was fascinating. We would sing, and it seemed like, there were voices that weren't ours, that were a part of all this, because we were resting, while we were singing. There was joy there, the great virtue of joy. Same way, we would sit and eat together. People would tell stories. I can remember other times when it became an enforced sense of non-activity, but that became something different. That became a protest that wasn't a virtue.
Right.
That was an attempt at control rather than an attempt at a virtuous good life.
Well, the other thing that can do that and destroy rest, for rest to be a practice that leads to a virtue, it needs to be an end in and of itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you find in the balance between, and I don't like the word balance, I like the word harmony, between work, play, and rest.
Yeah.
These things that are part of living a good life.
Yeah, that interactive
is
place.
when rest becomes a means to the end of getting back to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I worked for a guy for a while, and I remember him saying,
let's go to worship and recharge our batteries.
Recharge our batteries.
Oh Lord.
Or
get gassed up for the week. Of course, I'm thinking Nazarenes have enough gas.
Yeah.
But
so he would literally say,
ching. That's where you're supposed to laugh at my really bad joke.
That's exactly right. I'm sure that there's thunderous laughter happening among the tens of people streaming us at the moment.
All tens.
All
wow.
tens.
Well, we're up from 7.
I've never understood, if we run metrics, would we say tens instead of dozens? I've always wondered about that. But this guy that I work for would say, "Hey, this is a paid vacation. You're about to go on vacation. This is a paid vacation. I expect you to come back ready to work, refreshed. Hope you're not doing too much on your vacation, because I need you to come back here rest and ready to work."
Yeah.
Well, that just destroys your vacation when you run into your vacation to get rested so you can run back into work. True rest is an end, as are all of these practices.
Right.
We call them practices in order to form virtues, but we don't do the practices in order to get
No.
the virtue.
Right.
It places us in a place where virtues can grow like fruits of the Spirit. They emerge out of these practices. They are ends in themselves.
Yeah.
And rest, we have to recover rest as an end in itself, as opposed to rest as something that is preparing me for something else. Because then rest is not a practice. Rest is practicing for a practice.
Right.
If
Well,
if you
no,
carry
yeah,
it to
no,
the
yeah.
extreme.
It's practicing for life. I mean, it becomes, you hate to use words in here that aren't good philosophical words, but it becomes a part of the rhythmic activity that
That's right.
that pulls you toward the telos, towards the good life. Through the power of these virtues. Somebody asked me, they said, Protestants are big on this, and you're Nazarene, legalism, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah, but it wasn't like, if you're bothered by the word rest, maybe rest wasn't the point, not the way you think of rest. It wasn't non-activity. Maybe the point was contentment.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe the point was the kind of it's that picture again of Hauerwas telling the story of the sheep farmer who is completely content. I'm content.
And he wasn't just content on the Sabbath.
No, he's
Sabbath
the whole,
rest.
The whole
Sabbath
world
rest
was
is where
contentment.
we cultivate a habit of rest, but then that rest becomes a place from which we work.
Yeah. Well, and if as Christians, the goal and joy of life is God, and if what that means is that our lives are an event in the life of God, which is what I really believe, then this means there is a time, rest, in which I am content to be with God, to do what God requires, knowing all the well, right, that God is there with me, that God is the source of my contentment. God is the source of my joy. And there is a rest. I almost threw in the word confidence. I grew up in a Nazarene world that was a lot of things. But one of the things they were really sure of was that Methodist sense of, with confidence I now draw nigh, with confidence I now draw nigh, and Father, Abba, Father, cry, the great Charles Wesley hymn. There is a confidence in that. And this is, again, it's almost like you can't talk about rest without talking about confidence. You can't talk about rest without talking about simplicity. We make so much out of the things we do, quote unquote, as church. Oftentimes you and I grew up in churches where worship was an evangelistic service, and it was a lot of work. It was a work. And instead of being an expression of our confidence in God,
Right.
to reach the lost, but mostly to reach sinners like me,
Right.
to call me into a deeper and more immediate and intimate relationship with Him.
And there's where
And that's where you have to have rest.
and that's where rest also requires or develops the virtue of humility, because in order to rest well,
Yeah.
I got to lay down my tools.
Yeah.
I've got to lay
Selflessness.
down. I've got to lay down my desire to save you, and my desire to save myself,
And
and
my
my
desire
desire to support me, support my
to
family,
work to make me better.
and to do all of those things.
know.
In resting, there is a laying down, not of effort,
Right.
but a responsibility of this is all on me.
Yeah.
I love the response able, the ability to respond. We are response able in this relationship.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, who's doing the heavy lifting?
Yeah.
And in rest, there's an acknowledgement that it's all God.
Yeah.
And it's all gift.
And here is where, without making a lot of it, but to remind everybody in these conversations, this is where the great ideals that we are being of Methodist theology, that we are being transformed. The work of the sanctifying God transforms us. It does the work.
Yeah.
Of transforming us ever more into the likeness of the Son, Jesus Christ, who is completely dependent on the Father. and call. That's what kind of Christ likeness is about. Christ likeness is not about a set of things, activities that you do, where if you're nicer and you don't cut people off in traffic and you say
Right.
Something god awful like Jesus is the reason for the season, or something like that. You begin to understand this is what it takes. Rest is what it takes for me to be completely, in an unalloyed fashion, an unmixed fashion, devoted to God.
We've reached the point in the podcast where I can't remember what stories I've told and which ones I
Yeah,
haven't.
of course.
The nice thing about being a professor,
Yes.
and if you've never done it, then you wouldn't understand, that every so many months, they bring in a whole new class of people
That's
who
right.
have never heard
And
our
you
stories.
Tell our stories
They've
all
never
over
heard-
again.
So we
And if
only
they've
need-
had us in class before, like in another class, because I
they
teach
just
a couple
have to put up
of
with
they
it.
just have to put up with it.
They just have- like I got 8 stories, and I'm gonna recycle them. But I did a day of rest not too long ago, where I took a day, and I went to a park. I walked. It was a day of rest. I walked 8 miles.
Did you take your phone?
No,
Wow.
nothing.
Nothing.
Off
the grid.
A bottle of water
Off the grid.
off the grid in the middle of nowhere. My wife knew where I was, so if I didn't come back in a bit, they'd know
They'd
where
know
to
where
look
the
for
body
me.
was.
They'd know where the body
That's
was.
important.
That's always important.
Yeah.
And so I start the day of rest off, going to talk to God. This is going to be great, God. We're going to have this whole day, no phone, 8 hours, you and me. This is going to be great. And the only thing that I felt in my heart were the words, peace, be still.
Yeah.
Peace, be still. And I was like, I'm starting to think you don't want me talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Peace,
Just-
be still.
Just yes.
And I don't want to call it a vision because I don't want to scare you.
Well,
So
no.
I'm sitting on
I'm
a-
used to
I'm sit-
this.
I'm
I
sitting on
work
a-
with college students who claim to be trying to find Jesus.
That's exactly
And
right.
occasionally they say, "Hey, I heard something coming out of the trees the other day," and so I'm used to this.
Yeah, so I'm sitting on a bench, and I have this imagery of Jesus on the throne, and Jesus has got guys like they show in the movies.
Did he have like the sword coming out of his mouth,
He
like the
didn't
book?
yet, no.
Well, if it
They were
was,
putting on the tattoo.
Oh,
where it
okay,
said,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
King of Kings and
King-
Lord of- yeah,
he
okay,
was
all
getting
right.
his tattoos. But along the back wall, there's all these. So people, he'd be doing something. He would call somebody forward, and he'd say, "I need you to do this," and he'd call somebody forward. "I need you to do this," and hey, "I need you to this." And there was this blank spot on the wall, and he's doing his thing, and he looks at me and he goes, "See that spot? That's your spot. But you know what? You're never in it. You know why? Because you're running around doing all this stuff.
yeah,
When are you going to be still?
yeah.
When are you going to have rest?" I don't know how these things work. I think God works with us in different
Oh.
ways, but I tend to hear from God either in Scripture, and it wasn't like that was a movie that played out.
Right.
It was an image.
Yeah.
It was an image of
Well-
a blank spot on the wall that I wasn't in.
Well, but I think that's what happens. I was in England this past summer. I went to the Oxford Methodist Studies Institute. Wonderful
Talk about
time.
Tolkien's bench.
No, not again. I did visit Tolkien's bench, and some strange people came from another planet and visited me. But that's a whole other story. They were
Did
actually
they speak Elvish?
No, they did not. They just had
You
these
should've-
large
You
disco
should
balls
have
on their
told-
heads.
But you should have spoken Elvish.
And they did interpretive dance for a little birthday party down the way.
Oh.
That was different. But so I thought
feeling better about my vision.
Yeah,
all
I'm
of
sure
a
you
sudden.
are.
Feeling very normal.
And I thought, well, I'm this close. I've never been. It's the last piece of the Tribeca puzzle for the historian. I'm going to go the original Tribeca.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. I mean, visions, yes. Sitting in a room where John and Charles Wesley and George Whitefield and Hal Harris and the council, all this stuff in the Tribeca story. I drive out there, and there is no cell phone service. Everybody knows where I'm going.
Enforced isolation.
Yeah, it is. And I drive on to this isolated campus out in Wales. It's beyond the village. It's just farms. And I pull in and meet the guy who's the host there, and he says, "Hey, I need to run into town. Would you be okay here by yourself for a couple of hours?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I'll be."
Yeah, just fine.
And so there's this wonderful bench. There's this nice lawn.
Is it as nice as Tolkien's bench?
Oh, it's more glorious than Tolkien's bench because
that's right. I keep saying it. I say
Whatever is
Tolkien
around,
wrong.
whatever's around Tolkien's bench is not Tolkien. It's Oxford, and that's something else. It's wonderful, but not like this. And there's this wonderful bench, and he leaves, and I'm alone, and the sun is going down, and I look off into the west, and the mountains of Wales, South Wales, are out there. They're rolling, and the sky turns golden. And the only sound is this horse swishing its tail. And I look over, and they've
One of
put
my favorite sounds, by the way.
I know it is, and they've put up a cross, a very very rude cross, and there's a little, all that's left of a building, just almost a cornerstone, where the original Trevecca had its infirmary, where it cared for the bodies of people while they were tending to their souls, and the mission of the things that I've given my life to. And I just sat there for 2 hours. I didn't get the whole day before he came back. And I was at rest.
Yes.
It was just wonderful. It was, I hardly have the words, but I was content.
And then
And
then you texted
then
me,
I
which
texted you.
This makes me feel good. Now.
Good.
You shared this moment
I
with me.
did, because I don't, as you well know, I'm a person whose life is not built on contentment. My life is built on achievement. I have that Protestant sense of things that, there's
work ethic is alive and well.
It is, and it was instilled in me in 1,000 ways by all of my teachers, formal and informal, growing up.
You are what you do.
You are what you do. But boy, let me tell you something. I'm still not over.
No, you've talked to me about it
Yeah,
many
those
times.
2 hours.
Here's the thing. What we're telling you all is rest requires a bench.
Yeah, it really does.
But it's interesting because C.S. Lewis refers to these as thin spaces.
Yeah,
Spaces,
liminal spaces.
And they're these spaces where it becomes, we wear them thin. We don't discover thin spaces, we make them.
Yeah,
And we make them by resting, and resting in particular ways, so that there are certain places in this world and in this city and in my home
Yeah.
and in my office.
Yep.
There are certain places I can go that I've worn thin,
yeah,
and the presence of God is a whisper away, because I have been in those places and experienced things. There's a place in our home. We've only been in our home. It's just coming on 2 years now.
yeah. It's
And
brand,
I had
and
to,
it's
and
still
I had
new
to
to
wear
you.
some new spaces,
Yeah.
because I had some spaces in our other home after 20 years where prayer was as easy as what we're doing right now, because the space itself had become holy to me. You can't do that wiggling around. It takes rest to wear these thin spaces down, and it takes habit
Yeah,
to wear these thin spaces
Yeah.
down. And God hasn't moved closer. I've just learned to be quiet
yeah. In those spaces.
in those spaces. And that bench that I was sitting on in the middle of the park is a bench I've visited before.
Yeah,
For you, it's going to be hard to get back to that bench, but you've spent your whole life
I have.
at the place that place represents.
And that place is alive for me. And there are places I have discovered since I've been back here, back home, where that bench is almost available. There are some benches on our campus.
There are
There's
some places. Yeah, I've got some spaces
for,
like that.
for us at our house, it's the screened-in porch. We're Southerners.
See, and I've got these memories of there's places on that campus. The first place I ever held my wife's hand.
Oh, yeah. The first place
know
I ever saw my
exactly-
wife, I can take you to the spot.
First time my wife ever told me she loved me. I know the spot. It's still there.
Yeah, it's still there.
It's one of the things they haven't
Yeah,
torn down yet.
For us at our house, we have this screened-in porch, and right now we're missing it because it's cold. And we can't wait for the first warm morning of spring.
You don't have your old buddy dog to climb up and get on your feet and warm your legs
That's
up.
right. But we will go there, and we go every morning, and we just sit.
Yeah.
And there's occasional conversation, and we'll breathe a prayer, but for most of it,
Yes.
it's just the joy of that restful moment in the beginning of the day,
Yes.
where you know that God is with us and God inhabits that place. The other word for this, by the way, this is a Jewish word, is blessing. And you probably have heard.
Blessing.
Yeah. Well, you've probably heard the name Robert Weber.
Yes.
And Weber tells this great story. He goes out and he's the big guru that introduced the worship revolution after Vatican II to Protestants, but low church Protestants, evangelicals. And he gives this lecture, and this guy comes up and he says, I'm Jewish. My father's a rabbi. I want you to come see what we mean by rest in worship. And he says, oh, okay. He says, come to my house. You got to be there by 5 o'clock on Friday night. He gives him time. He says, we're Jews. We keep Sabbath.
Yes.
We don't work. And he says, if you come after 5, you can knock on the door all you want, but we won't come to open. We don't open the door. We don't do that kind of work. We don't, but I would love for you. So Weber goes and he brings a friend, and they bring their wives, and they're invited into this home, and they have this meal that you can tell that the wife has been cooking all day, so that they could just sit down and eat, and everything's prepared and everything's there. And as they eat the meal, the father in the house pronounces a blessing, not just over the food, but over all who are there to be a part of this sanctified occasion. Because in this meal, God is there with us. God is eating with us. God is directing our conversation. And they have this wonderful meal. And when they're done, the father, calls his children up to him, and he puts his hands on their heads. And he tells his kids what a blessing they are, and they're gifts from God, and how grateful he is to God for their lives, and how much God loves them, and how much God expects. They're good Jews. How much God expects from you. Yeah. But live a good life. And he blesses them, sends them off to bed. And when he's done, he looks down the table at his wife, and he tells his wife that she is the crown of their house, that she is the glory of their home, and that he loves her, and that she is and then he blesses them.
Yeah.
And he says, these are our new friends, and God has brought them to us, so that we might share in this life and at this table together and know what it means to be fed by the hand of God.
There you go.
And to live in God's rest and blessing. And in that, there's Sabbath, there's contentment, there's humility, because I didn't make these gifts.
Yes.
God gave them. And in all of that, there's rest. And in that rest is the good life.
This is The Good Life is produced by Nathaniel Jackson and is a ministry of Hermitage Church of the Nazarene. Visit hermitagechurch.org for more information about this podcast, as well as our other podcasts, all of which are a way that we're making Christ-like disciples in the nations. Thanks for joining us, and have a blessed day.